And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Europe is debating about its energy future while trying to find the temporary solutions to endure the winter. But many believe that mid and long-term goals are already quite clear, reflected by the latest legislation that requires all new cars and vans sold in the bloc to be zero emission by the year 2035. Meanwhile, Europe is also articulating its cooperation with partners around the world. The upcoming visit by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is, according to some analysts, a fine example of that. So how is Europe trying to find solutions out of the energy dilemma? Let's turn to this debate. For the latest analysis on Europe and its energy future, joining us in Vienna, Anis Barektarovich, who is the chairperson and professor in international law and global politics in Vienna, Austria. In London, we have Matthew Blondil, research fellow in the Strategy and International Business Group with the University of Warwick. In Hong Kong, we have Anatole Lebut, who is a professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, specializing in the fields of energy, environmental, and investment law. Last but not least, in Beijing, Jia Daojiong, professor of international political economy at the School of International Studies with Peking University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. So, they say it's both challenges and opportunities for Europe, looking at the latest energy crisis. What is your take?
In the short term, definitely there are many challenges in terms of lowering dependence on Russian fossil fuels here in Europe, in the European Union more specifically. But longer term, there are many opportunities in terms of decarbonization, climate change that can be solved, or not necessarily solved, but can be addressed and mitigated through the large-scale rollout of renewables and energy efficiency programs, etc. So it's clear that the European Union in particular has already taken that step. It has a framework in place, the Repower EU framework, which is supposed to guide the European Union and its member states at the same time getting rid of fossil fuels from Russia, oil, natural gas, and coal, and at the same time rolling out renewables in the context of decarbonization of the economy.
Mr. Barektarovich, what about for the short term? After all, this winter is going to be tough.
We had something which is called usually primary energy mix, which was heavily relying on the carbonic fuels or on the carbonics. So be it gas, be it oil, be it coal. So it's between, let's say, 75 to 95% when you see the national primary energy mix and the economies. And on the top of all of it, we get very severe conflict basically in the heart of Europe. We shouldn't forget that Ukraine is one of the largest countries, and basically the largest country of the world is having open military atrocities, conflict with the let's say interference from the Western side. So it complicates things, of course. It gives the opportunities, but we have to consider also the previous steps and let's say the lack of viable policies to tackle the problems of decoupling energy from the economic growth and from the change within the primary energy mix. Now, under the stress situation, there are opportunities, but we should not be, let's say, lame optimists in that.
Professor Jia, what about the short term? Do you see that your European colleagues have already figured out some options, at least, for the winter?
Well, the Europeans have been preparing for this for quite some time. They've done quite well in terms of energy storage, in terms of economizing of consumption, and also in terms of, should we say, fine-tuning the restrictions on imports from Russia so that to limit the damage to their own societies. On top of that, the world is really not that short of fossil fuels to tide the European difficulties over. So the short-term challenge is not just for Europe, it's actually for developing countries, let's say in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Some of the fossil fuel exporters can benefit temporarily, but for those importers in this part of the world, especially when we talk about the need of fossil fuels for things, production like fertilizers, it's really a structural challenge.
The upcoming visit by German Chancellor Scholz and also the European Union's documents, whether concerning cars, manufacturing cars, selling of cars, and also the future strategy of Europe as a whole in terms of grid. How much is there for space of cooperation? Do you know, do you think you can nail down some specific areas? Mr. Blondil?
Well, I think if you look at, for example, car manufacturing, it's absolutely key that Europe takes on a leading role here in order to protect its own industry as well, because otherwise it's going to be overtaken by competitors in Asia and East Asia, but also in the Americas, of course. And what you see now is this policy push at the European level, for example, to prohibit the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030, which I think is an interesting development, because then that allows these car manufacturers in Germany, but also in other European countries, to work around that and to strategize in that context in order to invest in their own research and development in order to produce cars that actually meet these targets and that allow them to develop the technology that gives them a lead over competitors elsewhere.
Anatol, what are you looking at with the coming visit by the German Chancellor and latest regulations and documents coming from the European Union?
Yes, so I think there is significant scope for cooperation in the renewable energy sector. I think China is a key supplier of low carbon technology to the European Union and therefore plays a role in this transition that we've already discussed in replacing fossil fuels with low carbon technologies. The significant manufacturing power of China, its capacity there is helping Europe to decarbonize. The same could be said about electric vehicles and batteries. And this presents an opportunity and a significant ground for cooperation. At the same time, there is a risk that some in Europe could see increasing dependencies in these new technological areas, but also in the field of rare earths and other critical materials as a form of vulnerability. And we've seen that these dependencies can, in the context of deteriorating geopolitical relations, can present security risks. So how far can this cooperation go? In my view, this cooperation is essential. China has played a significant role already, supplying this technology, in supplying this low carbon equipment, in helping the transition in Europe at a more affordable price. At the same time, a question for Europe is how far are they ready to go in increasing dependencies on one supplier? I think that's a question that has to be raised.
What are some of the areas you are looking at with the upcoming visit and also some of the latest regulations and laws coming from the EU countries?
Well, I see the German Chancellor's visit to Beijing as indicating that Europe, especially against the background of the United States, prodding European countries to launch Russia-like sanctions against China. Against that background, you have one European leader that, by way of making the trip, and before he made the trip, he approved a Chinese Costco, Chinese company's purchase of a docking facility at one of the German ports. He was indicating that Europe is also seeking its own autonomy. The situation is complex, but the cooperation really takes place at many, many different levels. I'm a bit concerned about the prevailing rhetoric in the transatlantic world about dependence or influence on a
But before we
one
go to
supplier.
the geopolitics, I know everything is related to geopolitics, but we cannot just let geopolitics drag all of us down, including our vision, our way to get there and get things done. So if I could, Professor, what are the areas of cooperation in terms of green, in terms of Europe's own destiny of seeking its energy, shall I say, independence? Where are the areas of cooperation between Europe and China?
Chinese companies are investing in battery production in Europe, and actually many of the electric vehicles, when they are sold in Europe, they have to comply with local content demands. And the third area of cooperation is to continue to keep the climate decarbonization on the agenda. So China and Europe have a lot of areas of cooperation, but then the challenge right now is that the supply chains are complex and difficult to map. A lot of times people equate, for example, a finished car or a finished solar panel as 100% Chinese. That's not true. If you look at the processing process of the processing different stops of rare earth and whatnot, Europe plays a very important role in turning the intermediate products, even that come to China for final assembly. So we need to really educate ourselves about the supply chain.
Anatol, your thoughts on that? Can businesses become smarter? Can we become smarter?
I think there are many developments. I would focus on one, if I may, and that is carbon prices and the carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe. I think this can be interpreted also in some ways as a geopolitical move, because it's a significant legal initiative that is proposed also to drive the agenda of carbon pricing globally in order to incentivize other countries to adopt carbon pricing, and also in order, of course, to protect the European industries against the risk of carbon leakage. Now, this is a major legal initiative that is closely linked to the European carbon prices, with global implications for businesses in China, in India, all over the world.
Dao Jun, could you also share your examples about where the cooperation might be, even though it could be tough?
In China, we, partly because of the pressure of decoupling from outside world, we need to very rapidly move up the technology chain. But the technology chain, in this case, cooperation with Europe, how to cooperate, we need to observe the norms and laws and the laws and regulations of technology transfer, and rather than going all the way by ourselves. In this way, we lock the Chinese and the European markets on an interest-based, let's say, on an interest basis. And the good news is that European companies have invested rather extensively at different stages of technological development here in China. You have many the European companies that have research labs here in China. So let's not simplify this to simply saying, well, Europe is a higher income society and it owns all the technology, high tech, and China makes no contribution. Technology development process is a tiered process. Scientists and technicians in lower income societies make contributions to what eventually become high tech. So the key here is to have the contracts clarified and fully implemented.
Matthew, your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, a couple of great examples by the other colleagues, and I'd like to pick up one as well. I mean, previously we've talked about the phase out of the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles, and I think there's a significant opportunity there as well. So you've got this European policy framework that says we're gonna prohibit the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles in the coming years. But as one of the colleagues, I believe it was Anatol, has already said as well, the manufacturing of batteries that will go into the electric vehicles that will replace these internal combustion engines, the manufacturing of those batteries primarily happens in China. So with a policy framework that is now being instated in the European Union, this creates significant opportunities for battery manufacturers in China to increase their exports to Europe in the coming years as well. And it's not just this battery manufacturing, it's also the processing of the minerals that are used to actually produce these batteries, the processing and the midstream basically of critical minerals such as lithium and cobalt, etc. So for Chinese industries, from processing of minerals to the production of batteries, these European policy frameworks that are now being developed, specifically here with the example of electric vehicles that are to take up and internal combustion engines that are going to be phased out, this creates significant opportunities for Chinese industry. So I see a lot of possibilities for cooperation and integration between European and Chinese value chains or production chains.
Anis.
You buy the car, you buy a Volkswagen, you know, the electric vehicle that now is available also here in Europe. You buy Volkswagen, but in reality, you know, so everything around you, you know, when you are steering this car and driving, everything around you is electrics and electronics. But in essence, you know, when you see the primary energy mix, your car is half driven by the coal and the other half is oil, because the primary energy mix is the challenge. So it's not, you know, and in that sense, we didn't change from the Kino's car of 150, actually 80 years ago, you know, when the steam engine cars were running the vehicles at that time. So in that sense, you know, we didn't move so much. I think depoliticizing of the energy markets and the energy thinking is important on national and also on international levels. So moving the politics and cheap goals that are achieved by the whatever world leaders who are making the pompous, I don't know, statements. On the other side, a local solution for the energy needs. This relaxes, you know, the global market of oil, of gas, and other, let's say, components that are getting into primary energy mix, and definitely decisive investments in research and development. It has to be run with the public sector and the private sector that goes around. You know, the public sector has to give direction, and of course, then you need government when we talk about the public sector. So, in my view, those are the let's say the things. Of course, now we are panicking. We are promising easy solutions, which makes a lot of harm. And in my humble opinion, I think the directive or incentive or even the order to actually to stop the production of the one type of the cars by this and that year, it makes more harm than benefits, because this is usually brought by people who are not understanding industries and the needs. And I believe that especially in the auto industry, the cooperation between Asia, notably between China and Europe, will continue. It will not get decoupled, of course. And from that perspective, I share opinion of other colleagues. I would like to see, and I see some encouraging signals of emancipation of the economic thinking of the Europeans, which was not a case in last years.
So how can we be able to think out of the box rather than be caught by just one logic? How much do you see this energy debate would be able to provide us with some kinds of inspiration, at least urgency?
Again, the magic word is decoupling. Decoupling, you know, from the economic growth from energy growth. We have to decouple, you know. We can achieve this. And then decoupling actually, or changing within the primary energy mix. I know you hate the word geopolitics, but the most traded commodity of the world, you know, 12% is going on oil. oil is globally traded. Why? Because there is no national oil in every country, you know. So therefore, we need local solutions. With the local solutions, you are actually decreasing the external vulnerabilities. So there are many facets and many aspects of it, you know, how you should regain the national possession of your energy.
We are not going to be caught in between, whether the business community or the general public. Is decouple the solution or not?
Well, the thing is, the energy transition as a whole, I think, is a key framework with which we have to work, because it allows us to be smarter in the sense that it allows us, this energy transition, to switch from a global energy system that is based on fossil fuels to one that is based on renewables and low carbon technologies and energy efficiency, of course. It allows us to be smart a bit because it kills multiple birds with one stone. And I'll give you
and that
some
to
of
you
these
is
birds.
smart, isn't it?
It is absolutely smart. Why is that? Because the first bird that you kill with the stone, if I can say it, if I can put it like that, is climate change. Renewables, when you use them to generate electricity, etc., they don't emit greenhouse gases, so they're far better than fossil fuels, than oil and gas and coal. So that's one. A second one is energy security. For the Europeans, it's become clear that being reliant on a military adversary, being Russia, I mean, that has a severely negative impact on the security of supply of your energy system. So if you can decouple from Russia as Europe, as European Union, and you can switch from a fossil fuel system to a renewable system, you become far less dependent on the Russias of this world. So that's the second bird. A third one is affordability. 2/3 of the people in the world already live in regions where the cheapest form of electricity generation is renewables, wind and solar. So, I mean, it's an issue of affordability as well, this current energy crisis, which has come because of our reliance on fossil fuels. So I think it's smart in a sense that you can tackle multiple issues at the same time with this energy transition, being affordability, energy affordability, security of supply, and sustainability, i.e. climate change.
That when we are decoupling, so-called, for the potential of cooperation, not decoupling for the sake of separate ourselves from everybody else. As we all know, it's impossible. So how would you articulate that?
So first of all, I'm 100% in favor of decoupling economic growth from carbon emissions, decoupling our energy dependency from our economic development. And to achieve that type of decoupling, we need renewable energy sources. Now, if we look at it from a geopolitical perspective, I think we have to be very, very careful if we advocate economic decoupling in the sense of becoming independent. I don't believe that energy independence is possible because even if a country is self-sufficient, its prices will always, in one way or another, be linked to international benchmarks. So energy independence is a myth. At the same time, to try to decouple energy systems from international cooperation, in my view, would be a huge mistake, because this cooperation is necessary to achieve cost efficiency. Without Chinese technology, without Chinese equipment in production of wind energy, solar energy, batteries, and maybe in the future hydrogen, the cost of renewable energy production in Europe would be so much more significant, as I understand. Not being an economist, but my understanding is that we need this cooperation to achieve energy security and climate change mitigation at more affordable conditions. And so to try to decouple our economies would be, from an economic and geopolitical perspective, would be a major mistake, in my view, both from a perspective of energy security and climate change, because we would lose all that potential. Cooperation is needed to address climate change. The cost of climate change mitigation, of the clean energy transition, would be so much higher if we would try to do it on our own without international partnerships and cooperation. At the same time, we live now in a geopolitical world. I think it's been proven very clearly by the crisis, the war in Ukraine. And so states have to carefully assess their dependencies. I think we have to be honest about that. I think that's important too, but not to the point of cutting off cooperations, of trying to become independent, because that's a myth, and that is only going to increase the cost of energy for the end consumer.
Anis, Anatola, Matthew, and earlier to also Dao Jun from China. Thank you.